The scream of terrified horses tore through the Montana night like a jagged blade. And Jake Sullivan knew, without looking, that something had spooked the entire remuda badly enough to threaten a stampede that could kill every man sleeping in the camp. He was running toward the makeshift corral before his boots were fully on, his heart pounding as he heard the thunder of hooves against packed earth and the splintering crack of wood as bodies slammed against the fence rails. Then, cutting through the chaos like moonlight through storm clouds, came a voice he had never heard before, a woman's voice, singing soft and low and impossibly calm. The melody was something ancient and wordless, a lullaby that seemed to wrap around the frantic animals like gentle hands, and Jake stopped dead in his tracks, frozen not by fear but by the pure, unexpected beauty of it. The year was 1884, and the cattle drive from Texas to Montana had been long and brutal, testing every man to his limits. They had lost 2 hands to a river crossing gone wrong, weathered a late spring blizzard that killed 30 head of cattle, and endured weeks of short rations when the supply wagon broke an axle in rough country. Now, camped in a valley 20 miles south of Billings with the herd bedded down and the worst supposedly behind them, Jake had finally allowed himself to believe they might actually make it. He was 26 years old, trail-worn and sun-darkened, with shoulders broad from years of hard work and eyes that had seen too much death for someone so young. His father had owned a small ranch outside of San Antonio before a bad winter and worse debts had forced them to sell everything. Jake had been working cattle drives ever since, saving every dollar he could, dreaming of the day he could buy land of his own and build something that would last. The singing continued, and Jake moved forward slowly, careful not to startle the horses further. The moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to see by, and as he rounded the corner of the corral he finally saw her. She was standing in the middle of the panicked horses, completely unafraid, one hand outstretched toward a big bay gelding that was rearing and showing the whites of its eyes. She wore a simple dress that had once been blue, but was now faded to the color of a winter sky, and her dark hair hung in a long braid down her back. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, with a face that would have been lovely if it were not currently set in such fierce concentration. She was singing directly to the bay, that same wordless lullaby, and as Jake watched in amazement, the horse's front hooves came down and it took a tentative step toward her. "Easy now," she murmured, and her speaking voice was just as beautiful as her singing, low and rich with a slight accent that Jake could not quite place. "Easy, big fellow. Nothing is going to hurt you. You are safe. You are safe." The bay stretched out its neck and blew hard, and she let it smell her hand before gently touching its muzzle. Around them, the other horses were beginning to settle, their panic subsiding as her voice worked its strange magic. Jake counted 16 animals in the corral, all of them remuda horses used by the cowboys during the drive, and every single one was now focused on the woman in their midst. She moved among them like water, touching each one, murmuring reassurances, singing snatches of that haunting melody. Jake realized he had been holding his breath and let it out slowly. "Who in the hell is that?" The voice belonged to Thomas Reed, the trail boss, who had come up beside Jake without him noticing. Thomas was 50 years old, grizzled and tough as boot leather, and in all the years Jake had known him, he had never seen the man look genuinely surprised. Until now. "I have no idea," Jake said quietly. "I have never seen her before in my life." "Well, she sure as hell knows horses," Thomas muttered. "That bay was about 2 seconds from going through the fence and taking half the remuda with him. Wherever she came from, she just saved us a week of rounding up scattered animals." Other men were gathering now, drawn by the commotion, and then held by the sight of the mysterious woman calming the horses with nothing but her voice and her touch. Jake recognized most of them from the months on the trail together. There was Charlie, barely 18 and still learning the trade. Old Pete, who had been working cattle since before the war and claimed he had ridden with some famous outfit in his youth, though the details changed every time he told the story. Miguel, quiet and competent, who could rope better than anyone Jake had ever seen. They all stood in silence, watching, until finally the woman seemed satisfied that the horses were truly calm. She turned toward the fence and seemed to notice the assembled cowboys for the first time. In the moonlight, Jake could see her face more clearly now. She had high cheekbones and dark eyes that looked almost black in the shadows. There was a wariness about her, a tension in her shoulders that suggested she was used to trouble. She walked toward them slowly, her hands visible and empty, and Jake found himself stepping forward to meet her at the fence rail. "Thank you," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Those horses were about to tear this whole camp apart. I do not know how you did that, but you saved us a world of hurt." She looked at him directly, meeting his eyes without flinching, and Jake felt something shift in his chest, a sensation like falling that had nothing to do with the ground beneath his feet. Up close, she was even more striking than he had first thought, with a face that spoke of mixed heritage, possibly Spanish or Mexican, possibly native, possibly both. Her eyes were intelligent and guarded, and when she spoke, her words were careful. "I heard them from my camp," she said. "Horses in that kind of fear, they will hurt themselves and anyone near them. I could not just listen and do nothing." "Your camp?" Thomas asked, moving up beside Jake. "You are traveling alone out here." A flicker of something crossed her face, too quick to read. "I am traveling, yes." "Alone for now. I mean no harm to you or your outfit. I will leave in the morning and be no trouble." "Hold on now," Thomas said, raising a hand. "I did not mean it like that. You are welcome to whatever hospitality we can offer. We do not have much, but we have coffee and beans, and you are welcome to share our fire. It is the least we can do after what you just did for us." She hesitated, clearly weighing the offer, and Jake found himself speaking before he had fully thought it through. "Please," he said. "It would be an honor, and besides, I would very much like to know how you learned to handle horses like that. I have been working cattle and horses my whole life, and I have never seen anything quite like it." She studied him for a long moment, and Jake had the distinct impression that she was taking his measure, looking for something that would tell her whether he could be trusted. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "Thank you. Coffee would be welcome. My name is Elena Ruiz." "Jake Sullivan," he said, and smiled, suddenly feeling absurdly pleased that she had agreed to stay. "These other ugly fellows are the crew. Thomas Reed is the trail boss. That is Charlie, Pete, Miguel, and more whose names you will learn if you stick around long enough to want to know them." She smiled back, just a small curve of her lips, but it transformed her face entirely, softening the wariness and revealing a warmth that made Jake's heart beat a little faster. "I think I would like that," she said quietly. They walked back to the main campfire together, Jake acutely aware of Elena beside him, the way she moved with an easy grace despite the rough ground, the way the firelight caught in her dark hair as they approached the flames. Someone had gotten the coffee going again, and Thomas poured her a cup in a battered tin mug that she accepted with both hands, as if warming herself. The night was not particularly cold for May in Montana, but Jake noticed that her dress was thin and worn, more suitable for summer in the southern territories than spring in the high country. "So, Miss Ruiz," Thomas said, settling himself on a log near the fire, "if you do not mind my asking, where are you headed?" "Billings is the nearest town of any size, but there is not much between here and there except ranches and empty country." Elena sipped her coffee before answering, and Jake could see her choosing her words carefully. "I am looking for work," she said finally. "I am good with horses, as you saw. I can also cook, clean, mend clothes, tend a garden. I can read and write in both English and Spanish. I am willing to work hard for fair wages and a safe place to sleep." "Running from something?" Old Pete asked bluntly, and several of the men winced at his lack of tact, but Elena did not seem offended. She looked at Pete directly and nodded once. "Running from someone," she said. But not the law, if that is your concern. I have committed no crimes. I am simply trying to make a new life somewhere far from where I was born." "That is good enough for me," Thomas said, shooting Pete a quelling look. "Half the men in the West are running from something or someone. What matters is what you do now, not what you left behind. If you are looking for work, I might be able to help. We are taking this herd to the Broken Arrow Ranch, about 15 miles north of Billings. Owner's name is William Mackenzie, Scottish fellow, been out here about 10 years. He is always looking for good help, and if you can handle horses the way I saw tonight, he would be a fool not to hire you." Alina's expression brightened with cautious hope. "You would recommend me? Even though you just met me?" "I trust what I see," Thomas said simply. "And I saw you walk into the middle of 16 terrified horses without a lick of fear and calm them with nothing but your voice. That takes skill and courage both. Besides, Mackenzie's wife Mary would probably appreciate having another woman around. It is a big ranch, good people from what I hear. They would treat you fair." "Thank you," Alina said, and there was real emotion in her voice now. "You do not know what that means to me. I have been traveling for 3 months, trying to find somewhere I could settle. Every town, someone recognizes me or asks too many questions. I just want to disappear and start over." Jake found himself intensely curious about what or who she was running from, but he respected that she had not offered details and did not press. Instead, he asked, "How did you learn to work with horses like that? The singing, I mean." "I have never heard anything like it." Lena turned to look at him, and in the firelight her eyes were warm. "My mother taught me," she said. "She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers. We are Californio Spanish settlers who have been in California for generations. My mother's family raised horses in the San Joaquin Valley. She used to say that horses understand feeling more than words, and if you can put calm and safety into your voice, they will believe you even when everything around them is chaos. The melody does not matter so much as the intention behind it." "It is beautiful," Jake said, and then felt his face heat because he had not exactly meant the method, he had meant her voice, but now it sounded like he was being forward. But Alina smiled again, that same small, transforming smile, and said, "Thank you. My mother had a beautiful voice. Mine is nothing compared to hers, but I remember the songs. They are one of the few things I took with me when I left." "Where in California?" Miguel asked, speaking up for the first time. "I am from San Diego myself originally." Alina's face lit up. "My family's rancho was near Fresno. Do you know it?" "I have passed through a few times," Miguel said. "Beautiful country, good horse country. What made you leave?" The light in her face dimmed. "My mother died 2 years ago. My father remarried quickly to a woman with 2 sons of her own. She did not want me there. I stayed as long as I could, but after my father died last winter, his wife made it clear I was no longer welcome. The rancho went to her and her sons. I had nothing, no claim, no home, so I left." "I am sorry," Jake said quietly. "That must have been very hard." Alina shrugged, a gesture that tried to convey indifference but did not quite succeed. "It is done now, I cannot change it. I can only move forward and build something new. That is why I am here. Montana is far enough that no one from my old life will find me. I can be whoever I want to be here." "You can be yourself," Jake heard himself say. "That seems to be working out pretty well so far." She looked at him again, and this time there was something different in her expression, a softness, a hint of vulnerability. "I hope so," she said quietly. They talked long into the night, the conversation ranging over many topics. Alina asked about the cattle drive, and the men were happy to share stories, some of them undoubtedly embellished, about the challenges they had faced. She listened attentively, laughing at the funny parts and wincing at the disasters. In turn, she told them about growing up on a horse ranch, about learning to ride before she could properly walk, about the elaborate fiestas her family used to throw that would last for days with music and dancing and food enough for half the county. Jake found himself watching her more than was probably polite, fascinated by the play of expressions across her face, the way her hands moved when she talked, the rich timbre of her laugh when Charlie told a particularly ridiculous story about trying to rope a calf and ending up tangled in his own lasso. There was something magnetic about her, a vitality and strength that drew him like a moth to flame. He had known plenty of women in his life, had even courted a girl in San Antonio seriously for a few months before the ranch failed and he left to find work. But he had never felt anything like this before, this immediate and overwhelming sense of connection, as if he had been waiting his whole life to meet Alina Ruiz and had not even known it. Eventually, Thomas stood and stretched, announcing that some of them had better get some sleep since morning would come early and there was still work to be done. Alina rose as well, thanking them again for their hospitality. Jake found himself on his feet without consciously deciding to stand. "I will walk you back to your camp," he said. "Make sure you get there safely." Alina looked like she might refuse, but then she nodded. "Thank you, that is kind of you." They walked away from the fire together. Following the path, Alina indicated toward a small stand of cottonwood trees about 100 yards from the main camp. The night was quiet now, the horses settled, the cattle sounds just a low murmur of breath and movement in the darkness. Above them the stars were brilliantly clear, the Milky Way a river of light across the black sky. "This is a beautiful country," Alina said softly. "So different from California, more open, bigger sky." "It grows on you," Jake agreed. "I am from Texas originally, which is also big sky country, but Montana has something special. I have been thinking about trying to find work on a ranch up here, maybe save enough to buy some land eventually. Build something permanent instead of just drifting from one cattle drive to another." "That sounds like a good dream," Alina said. "Hard work, but good. Do you think you will do it?" "I am going to try," Jake said. "I have been saving for years. Not much, but enough to make a start if I can find the right opportunity. What about you? What do you want besides work and a safe place to land?" They had reached her camp, which was small and neat. Just a bedroll and a small pack, a tiny fire that had burned down to embers. Alina turned to face him, and in the starlight her face was lovely and sad and hopeful all at once. "I want what you want," she said. "Something permanent, somewhere I belong. I have been running for so long that I almost forgot what it feels like to imagine a future. But tonight, listening to all of you talk about the ranch and the work and the life you are building, I started to remember. I started to think maybe it is possible for me too." "It is possible," Jake said firmly. "You are smart and skilled and brave. You will find your place. Maybe at the Broken Arrow if Thomas's recommendation works out, maybe somewhere else, but you will find it." "Thank you for saying that," Alina said. "And thank you for tonight, for treating me like a person instead of a problem or a curiosity. It has been a long time since anyone did that." Jake felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness rise in him, an overwhelming desire to shield this woman from whatever had hurt her, whoever had made her feel like she was anything less than remarkable. "You deserved better than you got," he said quietly. "I hope Montana treats you kindly." "I hope so too," she said, and then, impulsively, she reached out and touched his hand just briefly, her fingers warm against his skin. "Good night, Jake Sullivan. Thank you for everything." "Good night, Alina," he managed to say, though his heart was suddenly pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. He walked back to his own bedroll in something like a daze, his hand still tingling where she had touched him. He lay awake for a long time, staring up at the stars, thinking about dark eyes and a voice that could calm frightened horses and the way his entire world had seemed to tilt on its axis in the space of a single evening. He had heard stories about men who met a woman and just knew, instantly and completely, that she was the one. He had always thought those stories were exaggerations, romantic nonsense. But now, lying in the darkness with his thoughts full of Alina Ruiz, he wondered if maybe they had been true all along. Morning came too soon, as it always did, and Jake dragged himself out of his bedroll feeling like he had barely slept. The camp was already stirring, men moving about in the pre-dawn dimness, starting fires, making coffee, seeing to the horses and cattle. Jake went through his morning routine automatically, his mind elsewhere, wondering if Alina was awake yet, if she would come to breakfast, if he would have a chance to see her again before the crew moved out. As it turned out, he did not have to wonder long. Alina appeared at the main fire just as the sun was breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. She looked tired but determined, and she was carrying her small pack on her shoulder. "Good morning," she said. "I wanted to thank you all again before I moved on." "You have been very kind to a stranger." "Nonsense," Thomas said gruffly. "We are breaking camp in an hour and moving the herd up to the Broken Arrow. You might as well ride with us and save yourself the walk. We will introduce you to Mac Kenzie personally, make sure he knows what you can do." "You can ride, I assume?" Alina's face brightened. "Yes, of course, but I do not have a horse of my own. I had to sell mine in Wyoming to pay for supplies." "You can ride with me," Jake said quickly before anyone else could offer. "My horse can carry double for 15 miles easy. It is no trouble." Thomas shot him an amused look but did not comment. "Settled then. Miss Ruiz, help yourself to breakfast. We have biscuits and bacon and coffee that could strip paint, but it is hot and it will fill you up. Jake, get your gear together and saddle your horse. I want to be moving within the hour." The next hour was controlled chaos as the crew prepared to move out. The herd was big, over 1,000 head of cattle, which meant it moved slowly and required constant attention to keep the animals together and moving in the right direction. Jake saddled his horse, a sturdy buckskin named Copper who had carried him faithfully through the entire drive, and made sure his gear was secure. When he led Copper over to where Alina was waiting, he felt absurdly nervous, as if he were 16 instead of 26. "Ready?" he asked, and his voice came out normal, which was a relief. "Ready," Alina confirmed. She looked at Copper with an expert eye and reached out to let the horse smell her hand before gently stroking his neck. Copper, who could be temperamental with strangers, immediately relaxed under her touch, and Jake shook his head in wonder. "You really do have a gift," he said. "I just listened to what they are telling me," Alina said. "This one is a good horse, strong and steady. You have taken good care of him." "He has taken good care of me," Jake said. "More than once. Come on, I will help you up." He mounted first, then reached down to pull Alina up behind him. She settled onto Copper's back with the ease of long practice, and after a moment's hesitation, she wrapped her arms around Jake's waist to steady herself. The contact sent a jolt through him, acute awareness of her presence, the warmth of her body against his back, the scent of her hair, something herbal and clean despite days on the trail. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice a little strained. "Yes, thank you," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. The drive to the Broken Arrow took most of the day, the herd moving at its own ponderous pace across the rolling grassland. Jake had ridden drag before, eating dust at the back of the herd, and he had ridden point, helping to guide the leaders. Today, Thomas had him riding flank, which was a middle position, keeping the cattle in line without the worst of the dust. It was easier work, which Jake suspected was intentional, given that he had a passenger. Alina was a good rider, moving with Copper's gait instead of fighting it, and after a while Jake relaxed into the rhythm of the ride. They talked on and off throughout the day, shouting over the noise of the herd when necessary, falling into companionable silence when the cattle were quiet. Jake learned that Alina was 23, that she loved to read, but had only a handful of books, that she had a gift for growing things, and had kept an extensive garden at her family's rancho. In turn, he told her about his childhood in Texas, about his father's failed ranch and his own determination to succeed where his father had failed, about his dreams of owning land and building something that would last for generations. "You will do it," Alina said at one point with such conviction that Jake believed her. "You have the heart for it, I can tell." "I hope you are right," he said. "What about you? Do you want to own land someday, build something of your own?" "I do not know if that is possible for someone like me," Alina said quietly. A woman alone with no money and no family, but I would like to try. Even if it is just a small piece of land enough for a house and a garden and maybe a few horses, that would be enough. That would be everything. It is possible, Jake said firmly. People build new lives out here every day. You can too. I will help you if you want. Find you the right resources, introduce you to people who can advise you, whatever you need. There was a pause, and then Alina's arms tightened slightly around his waist. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked, her voice low enough that he barely heard it over the cattle's sounds. You do not know me. I could be anyone. Jake thought about how to answer that, how to put into words something he did not fully understand himself. I know enough, he said finally. I know you are brave and skilled and kind. I know you walked into a corral full of terrified horses to help people you did not know. I know that when you smile, it lights up your whole face. That is enough for me. The rest, I would like to learn if you will let me. She did not answer right away, but Jake felt her rest her forehead against his back just for a moment, a gesture that felt more intimate than words. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I would like that too. The Broken Arrow Ranch came into view in the late afternoon, sprawling across a wide valley with the Yellowstone River cutting through it like a silver ribbon. It was bigger than Jake had expected, with a large main house, several barns and outbuildings, extensive corrals and pastures that stretched as far as the eye could see. Thomas rode ahead to speak with Mackenzie, while the rest of the crew began the process of getting the cattle settled in the holding pens. Jake helped Alina down from Copper, acutely aware of the way her hands rested on his shoulders for balance, the way her body slid against his as her feet found the ground. This is a big operation, Alina said, looking around with wide eyes. I had no idea it would be this large. Mackenzie has done well for himself, Jake agreed. Thomas says he started with almost nothing and built all this in 10 years. That is impressive by any standard. They did not have long to wait before Thomas returned with a tall, broad-shouldered man who had to be William Mackenzie. He was perhaps 40 years old, with red hair going gray at the temples and the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor work. His eyes were sharp and assessing as he looked over the assembled crew, but when they landed on Alina, they softened with curiosity. Thomas tells me you have a way with horses, Mackenzie said without preamble, his Scottish accent still thick despite years in America. He says you calmed 16 panicked animals last night with nothing but your voice. That true? Yes, sir, Alina said, meeting his gaze steadily. I have been working with horses my entire life. I know how to handle them, how to read them, how to train them. I am also willing to do any other work you need. I can cook, clean, tend a garden, mend tack. I am a hard worker and I do not complain. Mackenzie studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. My wife Mary has been after me to hire more help around the house. She is managing more than one woman should have to, especially with a baby on the way. But I could also use someone with your skills in the barns. We breed and train horses here in addition to running cattle. If you are half as good as Thomas says, you would be worth your weight in gold to me. Tell you what, I will give you a trial period. 1 month. If it works out, you have a permanent place here with fair wages and a cabin of your own. If it does not work out, no hard feelings, and I will give you enough money to get to Billings and find something else. That sound fair? Alina's face was radiant with hope and relief. More than fair. Thank you, sir. I will not let you down. See that you do not, Mackenzie said, but his tone was not unkind. Thomas, I appreciate you bringing her to me, and you boys did good work getting that herd up here in one piece. Come on up to the house and we will settle accounts. Mary will have supper ready soon, and you are all welcome to stay the night before you head back. The crew followed Mackenzie up to the main house, a large 2-story structure made of timber with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. A woman emerged as they approached, obviously Mary Mackenzie, with blonde hair pinned up in a practical bun and a face that was kind despite the tiredness around her eyes. She was visibly pregnant, perhaps 6 months along, and she moved with the careful balance of someone adjusting to a shifting center of gravity. "Thomas Reed, you old scoundrel," she said warmly. "It is good to see you again. William told me you were bringing up a herd. I have been cooking for an army all day in anticipation. Come in, all of you, there is plenty." "Mary, this is Miss Alina Ruiz," Mackenzie said. "I just hired her on trial to help you with the house and work with the horses. Alina, this is my wife, Mary." Mary's face lit up. "Oh, thank goodness." "William, you did something right for once. Miss Ruiz, welcome. I am delighted to have another woman around. These cowboys are good men, but they are terrible conversationalists. Come inside, please. You must be exhausted from traveling." Supper at the Broken Arrow was a lively affair, with Mary and the ranch hands who worked there year-round joining the trail crew around a massive table in the dining room. The food was plentiful and good, beef and potatoes and fresh bread with butter, and Jake ate until he was comfortably full. He found himself seated across from Alina, and he caught her eye several times during the meal, sharing small smiles that felt like secrets. After supper, Mackenzie took Alina aside to discuss her duties and show her to the small cabin that would be hers if the trial period worked out. Jake helped Thomas and the other trail hands settle their horses for the night, but his mind was elsewhere, wondering how Alina was doing, if she was happy with the arrangement, if he would get a chance to see her again before he left in the morning. He got his answer when he stepped outside the barn and found Alina waiting by the corral fence, her arms folded on the top rail as she gazed out at the horses in the pasture. The sun had set, and the sky was fading from blue to purple, the first stars just beginning to appear. She looked peaceful and a little sad, and when Jake approached, she turned to him with a soft smile. "Hello," she said. "I was hoping I would see you before you left." "I was hoping the same thing," Jake admitted. He leaned on the fence beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "So, how do you feel about all this? Is the job what you hoped?" "It is more than I hoped," Alina said. "The Mackenzies are good people, I can tell. Mary is kind and Mr. Mackenzie is fair. The work will be hard, but I am used to that. I think I can be happy here, Jake. I think I can finally stop running and start building something real." "I am glad," Jake said, and meant it with his whole heart, even as he felt a selfish pang at the thought of leaving her here, of not seeing her every day. "You deserve that. You deserve every good thing." Alina was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I am going to miss you. That is probably foolish since we have only known each other a day, but it is true. I feel like I can talk to you in a way I have not been able to talk to anyone in a long time. You make me feel safe. You make me feel seen." Jake's heart was pounding again, that same wild rhythm from the night before. He turned to face her fully, and she turned to meet him, and in the gathering darkness her eyes were luminous. "It is not foolish," he said. "I feel the same way. Alina, I know this is fast, I know we just met, but I have never felt anything like what I feel when I look at you. I cannot stop thinking about you. I do not want to leave you here and never see you again." "Then do not," Alina said simply. "Come back, visit when you can. Write to me if you cannot visit. I will be here. I am not going anywhere." "I will come back," Jake promised. "I do not know when. The trail crew is heading back to Texas and I have to finish out the season, but after that I am coming back here, to Montana, to you if you will have me." Alina reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his, and Jake felt the rightness of it all the way to his bones. "I will have you," she said quietly. "I do not know what the future holds, Jake Sullivan, but I know I want you in it, however that looks, whatever that means." Jake lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and exactly right. "Then we will figure it out together," he said. "I promise you that. I am not going to let you go, Alina, not now that I have found you." They stood there for a long time, hands clasped, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. Alina told him more about her childhood, about the mother she had loved and lost, about her dreams for the future. Jake told her about his failures and fears, about the weight of trying to succeed where his father had failed. about the loneliness of years spent drifting from job to job with no real home. And as they talked, the connection between them deepened, becoming something solid and real, a foundation they could build on. Eventually, Mary Mackenzie came out to tell Alina that her cabin was ready, and Jake knew it was time to say goodbye, at least for now. He walked Alina to the small structure that would be her new home, a neat little building with a single room, a fireplace, and a narrow bed with clean quilts. It was simple but comfortable, and Alina looked around it with wonder, as if she could not quite believe it was real. "This is mine," she said. "Really mine, for as long as you want it," Jake confirmed. "Mackenzie is a good man, he will treat you right." Alina turned to him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for believing in me, for caring. For making me believe in possibilities again." "You did that yourself," Jake said gently. "I just had the honor of being there to see it." He reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "I will write to you, and I will come back as soon as I can." "Will you wait for me?" "Yes," Alina said without hesitation. "I will wait. However long it takes, be safe, Jake, come back to me." "I will," he promised. And then, because he could not help himself, he leaned down and kissed her softly. A gentle press of lips that was over almost before it began, but that seared itself into his memory like a brand. When he pulled back, Alina was smiling through her tears, and Jake knew he had made the right choice, that this woman was worth waiting for, worth working for, worth building a future around. He left the next morning with the trail crew, his heart heavy but his spirits high, already counting the days until he could return. The journey back to Texas took nearly 3 months, and every day of it, Jake thought about Alina. He wrote to her whenever they were near a town with a post office, long letters in which he poured out his thoughts and feelings, describing the landscape they passed through, the challenges of the trail, his plans for the future. He mailed the letters with no certainty that they would reach her, but he wrote them anyway, needing the connection even if it was one-sided. To his surprise and delight, when they finally reached San Antonio in late August, there were letters waiting for him at the post office, 6 of them, all in Alina's elegant handwriting. He tore into them eagerly, reading them in order, savoring every word. She wrote about her work at the Broken Arrow, about the horses she was training, about her growing friendship with Mary Mackenzie. She wrote about the beauty of Montana, the way the light hit the mountains in the evening, the vastness of the sky. And she wrote about missing him, about thinking of him, about looking forward to the day when he would return. Jake read the letters so many times he could have recited them from memory. He carried them with him everywhere, a talisman against loneliness. And he wrote back immediately, telling her that he had collected his pay from the trail drive and was already making plans to return to Montana. He had enough saved now to make a serious start at buying land, and he had heard that there were homesteading opportunities in the territory around Billings. All he needed was a little more time to get his affairs in order, and then he would be on his way back to her. The months that followed were a flurry of activity. Jake sold what few possessions he had, said goodbye to friends and acquaintances in San Antonio, and made arrangements to travel north. He bought a good horse, a strong sorrel gelding he named Red, and outfitted himself for the long journey with supplies and gear. He also bought gifts for Alina, small things that reminded him of her. A book of poetry he thought she would enjoy, a beautiful silver comb for her hair, a warm shawl in deep blue that matched her favorite dress. He left Texas in October, as the weather was beginning to cool, and rode north with a sense of purpose that made every mile feel like it was taking him closer to where he belonged. The journey was long and sometimes difficult, with early snow in Wyoming and a bout of illness that laid him low for a week in a small town whose name he promptly forgot. But he pushed on, driven by the thought of Alina, by the promise he had made to return. He reached the Broken Arrow in late November, riding up to the main house just as the first real winter storm of the season was threatening. The landscape was dusted with snow, and smoke rose from the chimneys of the buildings, promising warmth inside. Jake dismounted and was tying Red to the hitching post when the door of the main house opened and Mac Kenzie stepped out, bundled in a heavy coat. "Jake Sullivan," Mac Kenzie said, his face breaking into a grin. "Thomas said you would be back, but I was not sure I believed him." "Come in out of the cold, man. You look half frozen." "I am all right," Jake said, though in truth he was chilled through and exhausted from the long ride. "I am looking for Alina. Is she here? Is she well?" Mac Kenzie's grin widened. "She is more than well. She has been like a woman possessed, watching the road every day for weeks now. She is out in the west barn working with a colt. I will take you to her, but fair warning, if you hurt that girl, you will answer to my wife. Mary has gotten very attached to her." "I have no intention of hurting her," Jake said fervently. "Quite the opposite." "Good man," Mac Kenzie said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Come on then." They walked across the ranch yard to the west barn, a large structure that housed the breeding stock and training areas for the horses. Jake could hear someone talking inside, a low, murmuring voice that he would have recognized anywhere. His heart began to race, and he had to resist the urge to simply run to her. Mac Kenzie opened the barn door and called out, "Alina, you have a visitor." The murmuring stopped, and then Alina appeared from one of the stalls, leading a leggy chestnut colt. She was dressed in practical work clothes, trousers, and a heavy shirt with her hair in a braid down her back. She looked healthy and strong, her face glowing with the cold, and when she saw Jake standing there, her expression transformed into pure joy. "Jake," she breathed, and the colt's lead rope fell from her hands as she ran toward him. Jake met her halfway, catching her as she flung herself into his arms. He held her tight, lifting her off her feet, burying his face in her hair and breathing in the scent of her, horse and hay and something uniquely Alina. She was laughing and crying at the same time, her arms locked around his neck, and Jake felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness that told him he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "You came back," Alina said, pulling back just enough to look at his face. Her eyes were bright with tears, and she was smiling so hard it looked like it must hurt. "I knew you would, but it felt like forever. I missed you so much." "I missed you too," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every single day I thought about you constantly. I dreamed about you. Alina, these past months have been the longest of my life. You are here now," she said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "That is all that matters. You are here." Jake became aware that Mac Kenzie was still standing there, watching them with an amused expression. He set Alina gently back on her feet, though he kept one arm around her waist, unwilling to let her go. "Sorry," he said, feeling his face heat. "That was probably not very professional." "Do not apologize for being happy," Mac Kenzie said. "God knows there is little enough of that in the world." "Alina, why do not you show Jake your cabin and get him settled? You can take the rest of the day off. That colt can wait until tomorrow." "Thank you, Mr. Mac Kenzie," Alina said gratefully. She turned to Jake, her eyes shining. "Come on, I have so much to tell you, so much to show you. I still cannot believe you are really here." They collected the colt and got him settled back in his stall, then walked hand in hand across the ranch yard to Alina's cabin. It looked different from when Jake had last seen it, more lived in and welcoming. There were curtains in the window now, and a small garden plot beside the door that had been planted and then covered with straw for the winter. Inside, the single room was warm from the fire in the hearth, and Alina had made it her own with small touches. A quilt in bright colors on the bed. Books on a shelf, a vase with dried wildflowers on the table. "It is beautiful," Jake said, looking around. "You have made it a real home." "I tried," Alina said, suddenly shy. "I wanted it to feel like mine. I have never had my own place before. It has been wonderful." Jake set down his saddlebags and the parcels of gifts he had brought, then turned to her. "I brought you some things, nothing fancy, but I saw them and thought of you." Alina unwrapped the gifts with delight, exclaiming over each one. She ran her fingers over the silver comb as if it were the most precious thing she had ever seen, and she wrapped the blue shawl around her shoulders immediately, snuggling into its warmth. But it was the book of poetry that made her cry, tears streaming down her face as she hugged it to her chest. "My mother used to read poetry to me," she said, her voice choked. "I have not had a book of poems since she died. Jake, this is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. Thank you." "You are welcome," Jake said, pulling her close again. "I want to give you everything, Alina. I want to make you happy. I want to build a life with you. These past months, all I could think about was getting back here, seeing you again, figuring out how we can be together." Alina looked up at him, her dark eyes serious. "I want that too, but Jake, I need to know you are sure. We have only spent a handful of days together. What if you have built me up in your mind into something I am not? What if the reality does not match your expectations?" "That is impossible," Jake said firmly. "Alina, I am not in love with an idea of you, I am in love with the real you. The woman who walks into a corral of terrified horses without fear. The woman who sings lullabies and has a gift for growing things. The woman who is brave enough to leave everything behind and start over in a strange place. I know it is fast. I know it seems crazy. But I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you." He had not planned to say it quite so bluntly, but now that the words were out, he did not regret them. They were the simple truth, and Alina deserved to know. For a moment she just stared at him, her eyes wide and searching. Then her face crumpled and she started crying again, but these were clearly happy tears. "I love you too," she said, her voice fierce despite the tears. "I have loved you since that first night when you looked at me like I was someone worth knowing instead of someone to be afraid of or dismissive of. I tried to tell myself it was too fast, that I was being foolish, but I could not stop feeling it. I love you, Jake Sullivan. I love you so much." Jake kissed her then, a proper kiss this time, deep and slow and full of all the longing and hope and love he had been carrying for months. Alina kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms tight around him, and Jake felt like he was drowning in the best possible way. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alina was smiling that brilliant transforming smile that he loved so much. "So what do we do now?" she asked, a little breathlessly. "Now we figure out how to make this work," Jake said. "I have been doing some research about homesteading in Montana. The government is offering land grants to settlers willing to improve the property and live on it for a certain number of years. If I can file a claim and prove up on the land, we could have 160 acres of our own. It would not be easy, but it would be ours. We could build a ranch, start a horse breeding program, make a real life." Alina's eyes went wide. "You would do that for me, for us?" "For us," Jake confirmed. "I have been dreaming about this for years, Alina. Having my own land, building something permanent, but it did not really mean anything until I met you. Now I can see it so clearly. A house. A barn, pastures full of horses, you and me working side by side, building something together, maybe kids someday if you want them. A real family, a real home." "I want that," Alina said, her voice shaking. "I want all of that, but Jake, I do not have anything to contribute, no money, no land. You would be taking all the risk." "You have everything to contribute," Jake said firmly. "Your knowledge of horses alone is worth more than money. And besides, we will be partners in every way, 50-50. What is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. That is how marriage works." There was a beat of silence, and then Alina said, very carefully, "Marriage?" Jake suddenly realized what he had just implied and felt his face heat. "I am sorry, I am getting ahead of myself. I did not mean to pressure you. I just meant eventually, if things work out, if you want to, we could." "Yes," Alina interrupted, laughing through her tears. "Yes, Jake, I will marry you whenever you are ready, whenever it makes sense." "Yes." Jake felt like his heart might burst. "You are sure? You really want to marry me?" "I have never been more sure of anything," Alina said. She stood on her toes to kiss him again, quick and sweet. "You are the best man I have ever known. You are kind and honest and hardworking, and you see me, really see me, in a way no one else ever has. Of course I want to marry you. I want everything with you." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, making quiet plans for a future that suddenly seemed bright and possible. Jake learned that Alina had been saving her wages from working at the Broken Arrow, and while it was not much, every little bit would help when they filed their homestead claim. They talked about where to settle, finally deciding on a piece of land about 10 miles from the Broken Arrow that Mackenzie had mentioned was available. It had a creek running through it and good grazing land, perfect for horses. "We should talk to Mackenzie," Alina said. "Get his advice. He has been so generous with me, teaching me about ranching in Montana, introducing me to other ranchers in the area. He might be able to help us navigate the homesteading process." "Good idea," Jake agreed, "and we should probably tell him about, well, us. I do not want him to think I am taking advantage of his employee." Alina laughed. "I think he already knows. He has been asking me for weeks if I had heard from you, giving me knowing looks whenever I watched the road. Mary definitely knows. She has been trying to get me to admit my feelings for ages now." They walked up to the main house together as the winter storm finally began in earnest, fat snowflakes swirling down from a leaden sky. Mary met them at the door, took one look at their clasped hands and beaming faces, and let out a delighted squeal. "I knew it," she exclaimed. "William, come here, they are in love, just like I said." Mackenzie appeared from the back of the house, shaking his head with amusement. "Congratulations, you two. Mary has been predicting this since Jake left last summer. She is going to be insufferable now that she is proven right." "I am always right about matters of the heart," Mary said primly. "Now come in and tell me everything. When is the wedding? Where will you live?" "Oh, Alina, I am so happy for you." They spent the evening with the Mackenzies, sharing their plans and accepting congratulations and advice. William confirmed that the land Jake had been considering was good property, and he offered to help them file the homestead claim and connect them with a lawyer in Billings to make sure everything was done properly. Mary immediately began planning a wedding, brushing aside Alina's protests that they did not need anything fancy. "Nonsense," Mary said firmly. "You are getting married, and that calls for a celebration. It does not have to be huge, but you deserve better than just signing papers at the courthouse. We will have it here at the ranch in the spring after the baby comes and the weather improves. I will make a cake and we will invite all the local ranchers. It will be lovely." Alina looked at Jake, her eyes asking a silent question, and he nodded. "That sounds wonderful, Mary, thank you. For everything, you and William have been so good to us." "You are good people," William said simply. "We look after our own out here. That is how we survive." Jake stayed at the Broken Arrow through the winter, working for Mackenzie to earn his keep and save additional money for the homestead. It was a hard winter, with heavy snows and temperatures that dropped so low the water in the troughs froze solid overnight. But it was also a happy winter, the happiest Jake had ever known. He saw Alina every day, working alongside her in the barns, sharing meals at the main house, walking together in the evenings when the work was done. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, their strengths and weaknesses. They had their first argument, a minor disagreement about the best way to train a particularly stubborn horse, and learned how to compromise and apologize. They talked for hours about everything under the sun, sharing stories and dreams and fears, building a foundation of trust and understanding that Jake knew would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. In February, Mary gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Sarah, and Alina helped care for both mother and child in the days after the birth. Jake saw a tenderness in Alina during that time that made him fall even more deeply in love with her, imagining a day when she would hold their own child in her arms. The thought no longer scared him. Instead, it filled him with anticipation and joy. As the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Jake and Alina, with the Mackenzies' help, filed their homestead claim on the 160 acres they had chosen. The land was officially theirs, provided they met the requirements of improving it and living on it for 5 years. They spent weeks planning and preparing, ordering supplies, talking to other homesteaders about the best ways to build a cabin that would withstand Montana winters. Mackenzie gave them lumber at cost and offered the help of his ranch hands to raise the cabin walls, a gesture of generosity that moved both Jake and Alina to tears. In April, when the aspens were leafing out in shimmering green and the meadows were covered in wildflowers, Jake and Alina were married at the Broken Arrow Ranch. It was a small ceremony, just the Mackenzies and their hands, a few neighboring ranchers, and a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through the area. Alina wore a simple white dress that Mary had helped her make, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Jake wore his best clothes, which were not much, but Alina told him he looked more handsome than any man had a right to be, and that was all that mattered. They spoke their vows in the yard of the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, with the mountains rising in the distance and the river singing its endless song. Jake promised to love and honor Alina all the days of his life, to be her partner in all things, to build a future worthy of her courage and grace. Alina promised the same, her voice steady and sure, her eyes never leaving his. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed her to the sound of cheers and applause, and he felt like the luckiest man who had ever lived. The celebration that followed was joyful and raucous, with music and dancing, and a feast that Mary had somehow conjured despite the challenges of frontier cooking. Jake danced with his bride until his feet ached, and he watched her laugh and smile and glow with happiness, and he could not stop grinning like a fool. This was his wife, his partner, his future. The woman who had calmed frightened horses with her voice and who had calmed his restless heart the same way. They spent their wedding night in Alina's cabin, which would be their home for a few more days until the cabin on their homestead was finished. They made love for the first time, a tender and passionate and occasionally awkward experience that left them both laughing and crying and more in love than ever. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, talking quietly, making plans, dreaming aloud about the life they would build. "I never thought I could be this happy," Alina murmured, her head on Jake's chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his skin. "I spent so long just trying to survive, to get through each day. I forgot what it felt like to hope for something more, but now, with you, I can see it all so clearly. I can see our house and our horses and our children. I can see growing old together. It is all I want, Jake, all I have ever wanted." "Then that is what we will have," Jake promised, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I will spend every day of the rest of my life making you happy, Alina Sullivan. That is a promise." They moved into their homestead in May, once the cabin was finished and the first corrals were built. It was rough and primitive compared to the comforts of the Broken Arrow, but it was theirs, every log and nail and board. They worked from dawn until dusk, building and planting and planning. Jake filed the necessary papers to prove up on the land, documenting their improvements and their residency. Alina started a garden that quickly flourished under her care, vegetables and herbs and flowers that added splashes of color to the harsh landscape. They bought 3 mares in foal from Mackenzie at a fair price, the foundation of the horse breeding program they hoped to build. The work was back-breaking and never-ending, but they did it together, and that made all the difference. They learned to read each other's moods and needs, to anticipate and support without needing words. They had arguments and disagreements, because that was part of any marriage, but they always talked things through and found their way back to common ground. They made love under the stars on warm summer nights and huddled together for warmth during cold mountain storms. They laughed until they cried and cried until they laughed, and through it all, the bond between them only grew stronger. Their first year on the homestead was hard but satisfying. They survived a drought in July that nearly killed their garden, only to have it revive after a providential thunderstorm in August. They dealt with predators, losing several chickens to a fox before Jake managed to trap it. They worked round the clock during harvest, preserving everything they could for the winter ahead. And when the snows came again, they were ready, with a tight cabin and enough supplies to see them through. In the spring of their second year, Alina discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was sure. And when she finally told Jake, he was so overcome with emotion that he could not speak. He simply held her, his arms wrapped around her and his face pressed into her hair, his shoulders shaking with silent tears. When he finally found his voice, all he could say was, "Thank you. Thank you for this gift. Thank you for everything." The pregnancy was not easy. Alina suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, barely able to keep anything down, and Jake worried constantly that she was not getting enough nourishment. But as the summer progressed, she began to feel better and the sickness faded. By autumn, she was radiant, her belly swelling with their child, her face glowing with health and happiness. Jake found himself talking to the baby constantly, his hand on Alina's stomach, telling their child stories about the ranch they were building, the horses they were raising, the family they were becoming. Their son was born on a cold January night in 1886, after a long and difficult labor that terrified Jake and exhausted Alina. Mary Mackenzie came to help, and her steady presence and years of frontier midwifery experience made all the difference. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Jake wept openly, overcome with love and relief. They named him Thomas, after the trail boss who had brought Alina into their lives, and Jake held his son for the first time with hands that shook with awe. "He is beautiful," Alina whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "Look at him, Jake. We made that." "You made him," Jake said, gently placing the baby in her arms. "You did all the hard work. I just got to be here to witness the miracle." "Alina, you are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever known. I love you so much." Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn chin. He filled their lives with joy and chaos in equal measure, and Jake discovered reserves of patience and tenderness he had not known he possessed. He loved watching Alina with their son, the gentle way she held him, the soft lullabies she sang that reminded him of the night they had met. Sometimes Jake would stand in the doorway of their cabin, watching his wife rock their child to sleep, and he would be struck by how far they had come, how much they had built from nothing but hope and hard work and love. As Thomas grew, so did the ranch. They added more mares to their herd, and their breeding program began to produce foals that attracted attention from other ranchers in the territory. Alina's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and people came from as far as Billings to buy horses she had worked with. The money allowed them to expand, adding more corrals, building a proper barn, hiring seasonal hands to help with the work. In the spring of 1888, Alina became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier, as if her body remembered what to do. Their daughter was born in October, a tiny perfect creature with wispy blonde hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same deep brown as her mother's. They named her Rose, after the wild roses that grew along the creek on their property, and Jake discovered that loving a daughter was somehow different than loving a son, equally intense, but with an added layer of protectiveness that was almost overwhelming. The years passed in a blur of work and joy and the small daily miracles of family life. Thomas learned to walk and then to ride, showing a natural affinity for horses that made his parents proud. Rose grew into a bright, curious child who followed her mother everywhere, chattering constantly and asking a million questions. Jake and Alina added more land to their holdings, buying parcels from neighbors who were moving on or selling out. They built a larger house, with separate bedrooms for the children and a real kitchen that was Mary Mackenzie's envy. They planted trees around the house, cottonwoods and aspens that would someday provide shade and beauty. In 1891, Alina gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Daniel. He was a quiet baby, content to observe the world from his mother's arms, and he grew into a thoughtful, gentle child who had a gift for working with the most difficult horses. Jake sometimes looked at his 3 children and marveled at how different they all were, how each one was uniquely themselves, and he loved them with a fierceness that sometimes took his breath away. The homestead requirement was satisfied in 1889, and the land became officially theirs, free and clear. But Jake and Alina had no intention of leaving. This was home now, in a way that nowhere else had ever been. They had put their blood and sweat and tears into every acre, and it had repaid them 100-fold. The ranch was prosperous, their horses known throughout Montana and beyond for their quality and training. They had enough hands working for them now that Jake and Alina could afford to take an occasional day off, to ride up into the mountains together and remember the early days when it had been just the 2 of them against the world. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jake took Alina on a picnic to the place where they had decided to file their homestead claim. It was a beautiful spot, with a view of the valley and the mountains beyond, and Jake had worked for weeks in secret to prepare a surprise. When they crested the rise and Alina saw what he had done, she stopped dead in her tracks, her hand flying to her mouth. He had built a small gazebo, a simple wooden structure with a bench and a roof, positioned to take advantage of the view. And carved into the beam above the entrance were the words for Alina, who calmed the horses and captured my heart. All my love, Jake. Alina burst into tears, the happy kind, and threw her arms around him. You are impossible, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. How did you even have time to do this? I made time, Jake said, holding her close. Because you deserve it. Because I wanted you to have a place that was just yours, where you could come and think and remember how far we have come. 10 years, Alina. 10 years since you walked into that corral and changed my life forever. You changed mine too, Alina said softly. You gave me a home, Jake, a family, a future. Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to you. We built it together, Jake corrected. That is what partners do. And we are going to keep building it for the rest of our lives. 50 more years if we are lucky. 100 if the universe is kind. They sat in the gazebo for hours, talking and laughing and remembering. Alina told him that she could still hear the frightened horses from that first night sometimes, in her dreams. And the sound always brought her back to the moment when she saw him for the first time, standing at the corral fence, looking at her like she was someone worth knowing. Jake told her that he could still hear her voice, singing those wordless lullabies, and it still had the power to calm him when he was worried or afraid or overwhelmed by the responsibilities of their life. I love you, Alina said, as the sun began to set and the sky turned gold and rose. I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you until the end. You are my heart, Jake Sullivan. And you are mine, Jake said, kissing her gently. Always and forever, Alina, always and forever. They returned to the ranch as the stars were coming out, riding side by side, hands clasped between their horses. Their children were waiting for them. Thomas, now 12 and trying hard to act grown-up, Rose 8 and full of mischief, Daniel 6 and already half asleep on his feet. Mary Mackenzie was there too, having watched the children for the afternoon, and she smiled knowingly when she saw their faces. Good anniversary? She asked. The best, Alina said, and Jake could hear the joy in her voice. The very best. As the years continued to pass, Jake and Alina's ranch, which they had named the Singing Horse Ranch in honor of the night they met, became one of the most respected operations in Montana. Their horses were sought after across the territory and beyond, known for their intelligence, steadiness, and excellent training. Alina's methods, which emphasized patience and understanding rather than force, were starting to be adopted by other trainers. She sometimes held workshops at the ranch, teaching other horsemen and women her techniques, always emphasizing the importance of listening to the animal and working with its nature rather than against it. Jake, for his part, had proven to be an excellent businessman and rancher. He had a knack for knowing when to expand and when to consolidate, when to take risks, and when to play it safe. He served on the local Cattlemen's Association and was respected by his peers as a fair and honest dealer. Together, he and Alina were formidable, a true partnership where each person's strengths complemented the other's weaknesses. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning from both parents the value of hard work, honesty, and treating others with respect. Thomas showed early signs of becoming an excellent rancher in his own right, with a good head for business and a strong work ethic. Rose inherited her mother's gift with horses and her father's stubborn determination, a combination that made her a force to be reckoned with. Daniel, the quietest of the three, had a poet's soul and a horseman's hands, and Alina often said he understood animals better than he understood people. In the summer of 1895, the Mackenzies came for dinner, as they often did. William and Mary were both showing their age now, their hair silver, their movements a little slower, but they were still sharp and engaged, still the friends who had given Jake and Alina their start. Sarah, their daughter, was now 11, a bright girl who loved to read and who had a special bond with Rose. Over dinner, the conversation turned to the changes they had seen in Montana over the years. When Jake and Alina had first arrived, Billings had been a rough frontier town. Now it was growing into a real city, with schools and churches and businesses. The railroad had come through, opening up new markets and bringing more settlers. The wild lawlessness of the early days was fading, replaced by something more civilized, though whether that was entirely good or bad was a matter of debate among the old-timers. "Things are changing fast," William said, shaking his head. "Sometimes I barely recognize the place. But I suppose that is progress. My father used to talk about how Scotland changed during his lifetime. He would probably say the same thing about Montana if he were here to see it." "Some things stay the same, though," Mary said, smiling at Jake and Alina. "Good people working hard and taking care of each other. That has not changed. That will never change as long as there are folks like you two setting the example." Later that night, after the Mackenzies had gone and the children were in bed, Jake and Alina sat on the porch of their house, watching the stars and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. The horses were quiet in their corrals, the cattle just a low murmur in the distance. It was peaceful and perfect, and Jake felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "What are you thinking about?" Alina asked softly, her head resting on his shoulder. "About how grateful I am," Jake said. "For all of this, for you, for our children, for the life we have built. When I was young, drifting from job to job, I used to dream about having something like this, but it always seemed so far away, so impossible. And then I met you and suddenly everything changed. You made all of this possible, Alina." "We made it possible," Alina corrected gently. "Together." "That is the whole point, Jake. Neither of us could have done this alone. We needed each other. We still need each other." "I know," Jake said. "And I thank God every day that you were there that night, singing to those horses. I thank God that you had the courage to walk into that corral. I thank God that I had the sense to fall in love with you immediately instead of wasting time being cautious or sensible." Alina laughed softly. "I fell in love with you immediately too. I tried to fight it, tried to tell myself it was too fast, but it was no use. My heart knew what it wanted. It wanted you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Jake said, "Do you ever regret it? Leaving California, leaving your old life behind?" "Not for a single second," Alina said firmly. "Everything I lost long before I left California. My mother, my father, my home. Coming here was not about running away, it was about running toward something, toward a new life, toward hope, toward you, and look what we found. Look what we built. This is everything I ever dreamed of and more than I ever thought I could have. I have no regrets, Jake, only gratitude." "I feel the same way," Jake said. He turned to kiss her, a soft press of lips that still had the power to make his heart race after 11 years of marriage. "I love you, Alina Sullivan, more than words can say." "I love you too," Alina whispered against his lips, "until the end of time." The years continued their steady march forward, bringing both joys and challenges. In 1897, a severe drought tested the ranch's resources, forcing Jake and Alina to make difficult decisions about which animals to keep and which to sell. They weathered the crisis through careful management and the support of their neighbors, including the Mackenzies, who helped them get through the worst of it. When the rains finally came again in the spring of 1898, the relief was palpable, and the ranch rebounded quickly. Thomas turned 18 in 1896, and Jake signed over a portion of the ranch to him, making him a full partner in the operation. It was an emotional moment, seeing his son become a man, taking on adult responsibilities. Alina cried, of course, but they were happy tears. Pride mixed with a bittersweet awareness that their children were growing up and would soon be making their own ways in the world. Rose, now 14, announced that she wanted to become a veterinarian, a shocking declaration given that it was a profession almost entirely closed to women. But Alina and Jake had always encouraged their children to dream big, and they promised to support her however they could. They made inquiries and learned that there were a few veterinary schools in the East that might accept female students, and they began saving money to send her when she was old enough. Daniel, at 12, was still trying to figure out who he wanted to be. He loved the ranch and the horses, but he also loved reading and learning, and he talked sometimes about becoming a teacher or a writer. Jake and Alina assured him that he had time to decide, that they would support whatever path he chose. In 1899, William Mackenzie fell ill with pneumonia. He fought it bravely, but he was in his 60s now, and his body could not recover. He died in early February, surrounded by his family and friends, and the entire community mourned the loss of a good man. Jake spoke at the funeral, his voice breaking as he described how William and Mary had given him and Alina their chance, had believed in them when they had nothing but dreams and determination. Alina sang, a hymn that brought tears to every eye, her voice as pure and beautiful as it had been the night they met. Mary was devastated by William's death, and for a while it seemed like she might fade away too, lost in grief. But she was stronger than she looked, and with the support of her daughters Sarah and her friends, including Jake and Alina, she gradually found her footing again. She decided to stay on at the Broken Arrow, turning over the day-to-day management to the foreman but remaining involved and engaged. She became even closer to Alina, the two women bonding over shared loss and the challenges of life in Montana. The new century arrived, and with it came a sense of change and possibility. The old frontier was fading, replaced by something more settled and civilized. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, and by 1900, it was becoming more integrated into the rest of the nation. Railroads connected even remote areas, making travel and commerce easier. Telephones were starting to appear, though they were still rare in rural areas. Automobiles were being talked about, though most people still relied on horses for transportation. Jake and Alina watched these changes with a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. They were glad for the improvements that made life easier and safer, but they also mourned the passing of the old ways, the sense of adventure and possibility that had drawn them to Montana in the first place. But they adapted as they always had, embracing new technologies when they made sense while holding on to the values and traditions that had always guided them. In the spring of 1901, Rose left for veterinary school in the East, a bittersweet departure that left Alina weeping for days. But she was also fiercely proud of her daughter, who was determined to make her own mark on the world. Rose wrote home regularly, sharing stories of her studies and the challenges of being one of only 2 women in her class. She faced discrimination and skepticism, but she persevered, driven by the same stubborn determination she had inherited from both her parents. Thomas, now 23, began courting a young woman named Catherine Miller, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. She was a sweet, capable girl who loved the ranch life, and Jake and Alina approved wholeheartedly. The wedding took place in the summer of 1902, a joyous affair that brought together friends and family from across the territory. Watching his son marry reminded Jake of his own wedding day, the hopes and dreams he had carried into his marriage, and he found himself giving Thomas advice based on years of experience. "Marriage is work," he told his son the night before the wedding. "It is not always easy. You will argue and disagree and sometimes wonder if you are doing anything right. But if you remember to be partners, to respect each other and support each other, and never stop communicating, you can build something beautiful. Look at your mother and me. We started with nothing but love and determination, and look at what we have created. You can do the same with Catherine if you are willing to put in the effort." Thomas took the advice to heart, and his marriage proved to be a strong and happy one. Catherine fit into the family seamlessly, bonding quickly with Alina and becoming another daughter to Jake. In 1903, she gave birth to a son, making Jake and Alina grandparents for the first time. They named the baby William, after William Mackenzie, and Jake held his grandson with the same awe and wonder he had felt holding his own children for the first time. "This is what it is all about," he said to Alina, as they stood together looking at the baby sleeping in Catherine's arms. "Family. Legacy, building something that will last beyond ourselves. This little boy is our future, Alina, him and all the children who will come after. This is what we have been working for all these years." Alina leaned against him, her eyes soft. "I know, and it is beautiful, all of it. I would not change a single thing about our life together, Jake. Not one single thing." Daniel graduated from the local school in 1903 and, after much deliberation, decided to attend the university in Missoula to study literature and education. He wanted to teach, he said, to share his love of learning with others. Jake and Alina were proud of this choice, though it meant another child leaving home. But they understood that their children had to make their own paths, just as they had. By 1905, the Singing Horse Ranch was firmly established as one of the premier horse breeding operations in Montana. Jake and Alina had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses, and had emerged stronger each time. Their partnership was the foundation of everything they had built, a union of equals where each person's contributions were valued and respected. They were in their 40s now, showing the wear of a lifetime of hard physical work, but still vigorous and engaged. Jake's hair was threaded with silver, and the lines around his eyes had deepened from years of squinting into the sun. Alina's beauty had matured into something even more striking, her face showing character and strength, her dark eyes still as captivating as they had been the night they met. One evening in late summer, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Alina said, "Do you remember that first night, when I was singing to the horses?" "Every single detail," Jake said immediately. "I remember the way you stood in the middle of all those panicked animals, completely unafraid. I remember your voice, how it cut through the chaos. I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone like you before, that I probably never would again. And I remember the moment I looked at you and knew, absolutely knew, that you were going to change my life." Alina smiled, that same transforming smile he loved so much. "I remember looking at you and thinking how kind your eyes were, how open your face was. Most men looked at me with suspicion or lust or dismissal, but you looked at me like I was a person, like I was someone worth knowing, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this could be someone I could trust, someone I could build a life with." "You were right," Jake said softly. "We built a hell of a life, did not we?" "We did," Alina agreed. "And we are not done yet. We still have years ahead of us, Jake. Years to watch our children grow and succeed. Years to meet more grandchildren. Years to keep building and improving and making this place even better. I am not ready to be done living, not by a long shot." "Neither am I," Jake said, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. "I plan on growing old with you, Alina Sullivan. I plan on being that couple people point to and say, look at them, married for 50 years and still holding hands. Still in love, that is what I want, that is what we are going to have. Promise." Alina asked, and there was vulnerability in her voice, a rare moment of uncertainty. I promise, Jake said firmly, on everything I hold sacred, on this land and our children and the life we have built together. I promise you that I will be by your side until my last breath, and maybe, if we are lucky, even beyond that. Alina squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears. I love you so much. Sometimes I think my heart cannot possibly hold any more love, and then I look at you and it just expands again. You are everything to me, Jake, everything. And you are everything to me, Jake said, pulling her close and wrapping his arms around her. From that very first night until this very moment and every moment to come, you are my heart, my soul, my home. They sat together as the stars came out one by one until the sky was full of light. In the corrals, the horses settled down for the night, quiet and content. In the house behind them, the lamps were lit, warm light spilling from the windows. It was a scene of perfect domestic tranquility, the result of 20 years of hard work, sacrifice, and unwavering love. The years ahead would bring more changes and challenges. Rose would graduate from veterinary school and return to Montana to practice, becoming one of the first female veterinarians in the state. Daniel would become a beloved teacher, shaping young minds and writing poetry in his spare time. Thomas and Catherine would have 3 more children, filling the ranch with the sound of young voices and laughter. Mary Mackenzie would pass away peacefully in her sleep in 1908, reunited at last with the husband she had loved so deeply. But through it all, Jake and Alina remained the constant center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year. They became the elder statesmen of the ranching community, the couple everyone looked up to as an example of what a marriage should be. On their 30th wedding anniversary, in 1914, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were 8 grandchildren now, ranging from infant to preteen, and the house was filled with chaos and joy. Jake looked around at all the faces, all the people who existed because he and Alina had found each other that night in 1884, and he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Alina must have sensed what he was feeling because she appeared at his side and took his hand. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "About how lucky I am," Jake said, "about how one moment changed everything. If those horses had not spooked that night, if you had not heard them and come to help, if I had not been standing at that fence at that exact moment, none of this would exist. All of these people, all of this joy, it all came from one moment of fate. Or destiny," Alina said. "I like to think it was destiny, that we were always supposed to find each other, that the universe conspired to bring us together because it knew what we could build if we had the chance." "I like that idea," Jake said, kissing her temple. "Destiny, that means we were always meant to be." "We were," Alina said with absolute certainty. "From the beginning of time, you and me, always and forever." As the sun set on that anniversary celebration, Jake and Alina stood together on the porch of the house they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, on the land they had claimed and improved and loved. The horses in the pasture were quiet, content, their occasional nickering a soft counterpoint to the sounds of laughter from inside the house. Alina began to hum, almost unconsciously, one of the old lullabies she had sung to the horses that first night. Jake recognized it immediately and smiled, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. They swayed gently to the wordless melody, dancing without music on the porch where they had shared so many quiet evenings over the years. "I would do it all again," Alina said suddenly. "Every hard moment, every challenge, every sacrifice, I would do it all again in a heartbeat because it brought me here, to you, to this life, to this moment." "So would I," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion, 1,000 times over. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Alina, the very best thing." They continued to sway together as the stars came out, as they had done countless times over the past 30 years. And as Alina's voice rose in that familiar haunting melody, Jake closed his eyes and remembered the frightened horses and the brave woman who had calmed them with her song. He remembered falling in love fast and hard and completely. He remembered every moment that had brought them to this point, every joy and sorrow and triumph, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would love Alina Sullivan until his dying day and beyond. She had given him everything he had ever wanted and things he had not known to dream of. She had been his partner, his love, his home. From the corral, one of the horses whinnied softly, as if responding to Alina's song. Jake smiled against her hair, thinking about how appropriate that was, how their whole life had started with her gift for calming frightened animals. That gift had expanded over the years to include calming frightened husbands and children and grandchildren, to bringing peace and stability to everyone lucky enough to know her. "Thank you," Jake whispered. "For everything, for being you, for choosing me, for building this life with me. Thank you." Alina turned in his arms to face him, her face radiant in the starlight. "Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for loving me. Thank you for being the kind of man who would help a stranger in the night. Thank you for being my husband, my partner, my great love." They kissed then, a long, sweet kiss that held 30 years of love and commitment and partnership. And when they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying happy tears, overwhelmed by the beauty of what they had created together. Inside the house, their family was waiting. Their children and grandchildren, the legacy of their love. Outside, the ranch sprawled across the land they had claimed and made their own. The horses they had bred and trained. The life they had built from nothing but courage and determination and unwavering faith in each other. It was everything. It was more than everything. And it had all started with frightened horses and a woman who sang to calm them and a cowboy who listened and fell in love fast. As they walked back into the house hand in hand, ready to rejoin their family, Jake squeezed Alina's fingers gently. She squeezed back and no words were needed. They both knew what the gesture meant. "I love you. I choose you, today and always, forever."